starting at the end of middle school, going into high school, I really got into making short films. Again, I was raised on the cinema, not just going into movies or constantly being in front of a TV, but my mother worked at a video rental store, and I would be there with her when I was younger, so for a while I would just always be watching movies. I love movies. Not always movies that were objectively good. I loved schlock, B movies, trauma films, horror films. Just I liked cinema as an expression of entertainment, as a sort of surreal dreamscape, you know what I mean? And even before I went to school and learned, the language of film and film studies courses, I always knew internally the sort of creative joy inherent in the cinematic. So it would either be, sometimes these film projects would be, and they would be, I wouldn't say poorly made or poorly edited, but my philosophy from the get-go, these films I would make, I used to have an old recorder that it didn't have like a VHS in it, but it had like the smaller sort of cassette tapes that you would have to, and this was in an era where digital cameras were out there. I was just, always sort of contrarian and a Luddite. I would, when I wasn't handwriting my papers in high school, if I did have to type them up, I had a fucking typewriter, Trust me, when you got no time to edit or do drafts and you're doing all your work at like 5 in the morning before you gotta catch the fucking 6:30 bus, you'll learn with a typewriter to just wing it and make those sentences count, because they gotta count. And if they don't work, well, keep it moving, Jack. But, so I wouldn't use editing software. I would just film it. One shot, boom, boom, boom. Hope we get it right the first time. I worked with a couple buddies of mine who, had laptops, so we would do, some projects were seriously edited. But it was funny because these projects weren't even with, most of the good ones weren't even with people who I was in the same class with. My close friends, Nick and Ryan, we lived pretty much in the same block together. And we all went to 3 sort of separate high schools. I went to East Hartford High School. My friend Nick went to the IB. My friend Ryan went to the Cheney Tech school in Clanchester. And we would triple dip, so we'd all film projects together, but then each use them separately, as if they were our own. And it'd be funny, that the grades would never be the same. We did some very, and most of them I think have been lost to the sands of time and negligence. It's probably for the best because they were very provocative and controversial and do not age well. Particularly one in which I have a swastika on my chest and we crucify a kid. We did an adaptation of Albert Camus' novel The Stranger. It's like 40 minutes long. It's just so indulgent, so silly. Worked out pretty well. I wish I still had a copy of that, because my friend Miles is in it. He plays a necrophiliac mortician. This is a high school project. He plays a necrophiliac mortician. That was a good time. So, during this era, though, I had one idea for one short film that I was never able to produce. Sorta. And I don't know, maybe it could work as a short story as well, which is why I think I'm just gonna sort of tell it now. I never really had a working title for it. I don't know, The Key to Happiness. Let's call it The Key to Happiness. So, in lieu of me ever making this a short film, I'm going to just tell you my ideas for it. I might add some details as I go along, because after all, like everything else, I'm just pulling this out of my ass as I go along. Alright, so imagine almost a Pleasantville-style town. Not quite old school, small, backwards, but not quite big enough to be a real city. A sort of pastiche of different eras, sort of not quite from the 50s, but with that kind of parochial vibe of the 50s, perhaps with the architecture of the 80s, So, mid-sized town. There's a local misanthrope. The man. Let's just call him the man. So the man is, you know, not a violent person, but he just has an inherent disdain for the world around him. He sort of just walks around, looking around, just judging the citizens and just muttering to himself. So again, most of the citizens are stuck in this sort of parochial veil of illusions, going about their motions, never quite questioning their systems and their way of life. So this man just, has this deep-seated, just seething, almost loathing, So in his isolation, he just always keeps that distance. But again, never doing anything destructive to the community. Not a sociopath. Just a misanthrope. One day, though, he walks by a house he usually walks by countless times before, and it's, one thing is different. It's on fire. So it's on fire now. It's for fucking... It's a plot hole, but for logistical reasons, let's just say that, again, this town, not big enough to have many fire departments, so the one fire crew that would be nearby is off somewhere else, so they're not able to get there in time to put the fire out before it succumbs most of the home. So the woman outside, though, screaming, "My baby, my baby, my baby's in there." So this man, this misanthrope, just naturally, without thinking, without overanalyzing, without, even being worried about his safety, just instinctually realizing that there's a baby about to be burned to death, he busts into the house, Long story short, it's very heroic and very dangerous, and he comes out of the house, soot, seared hairs, baby cradled in his arm, wrapped in a wet blanket. And, he hands the baby to the woman and just goes off on his way. Doesn't really want to stick around and just create small talk. But obviously the woman, she's in shock. But, when the fire department finally does get there and they ask her what happened, she goes like, this man, I don't know who he was, but he came and he saved my baby. And so then kind of describes the guy, and then one of the firefighters sort of knows what they're talking about. Again, most of the town had no idea that the man kind of resented them, that he was a misanthrope. Most of the town had no idea that man even existed. He would walk by them and they wouldn't pay him much mind. But long story short, they figure out who he is and they find him. And, the mayor and the local establishments decides that they want to have a ceremony. Remember the trope? Remember the trope of people getting keys to the city? I don't think they do that much anymore. Maybe some places that are more wholesome and, again, parochial and backwards. But every year or so, we're like, hey, so and so did something cool. Let's have a ceremony where we give them the key to the city. Transactional gesture. So they decide they're gonna invite the whole town to the sort of local square and have a big celebration, coincides sort of with the anniversary of the town as well. So they're going to be like, all right, well, we can have this, and then we can have this ceremony where we give this guy a key to the city for saving this baby, quintessential, great photo op for everybody involved. Obviously, the motherfucking man is fucking disgusted by the whole fucking thing, but hey, what are you gonna do? He's got fucking no choice. He's wrapped into it. You do one good deed. So, the ceremony happens. Whole town's there. They begin with giving the man the key to the city, and shake his hand, and babies are kissed. Well, then at some point, as the ceremony switches over to the sort of celebration of the town's anniversary, just as before, the people who had previously ignored this man's existence start to do the same thing, and their eyes and their attention then shifts to the ceremonies at hand. And everyone's sort of literally, they're all patting themselves on the back, and they're like, yeah, we're the best town, we got the best people, we're the best, yes. And they all start chanting, we're the best, And the dude, the fucking misanthrope, is just there fucking holding this key in his hand, just fucking, he can't believe it. Part of him almost wished he'd just let the baby die, but it's a baby, of course you're gonna save it. But he's just there, again, alone and ignored. So, under the cover of this anonymity, he leaves where the ceremony is being held in the public square and goes to the nearby parking lot, in which, again, every citizen in the town had parked their car. And the man, solemn at first, but increasingly with a smile, and he has never been seen smiling in his life. Perhaps he has once or twice, just by pure accident, but this, of course, is the biggest smile, and perhaps the only real smile this man ever had in his life as it builds, as he takes that giant ceremonial key that was just given him, and proceeds to key every car in the parking lot. Deep gouges. Deep, long, like I'm talking ripping the metal apart almost. He goes along and does this. And again, if the nearby townsfolk weren't so busy chanting, "We are the best, we are the best, we are the best," perhaps they would notice or hear the sounds of their vehicles being totaled before it was too late, but they did not. So the man gets to the last car and gazes over his mighty works, the car, an inch in front of him. The smile resolving itself back to his blank, pitiless look as he drops the key to the ground and walks away one last time. That was more or less the gist of it. This was an idea I had almost 20 years ago. But it's funny. I like to think of art as both something that we project, a part of ourselves, a unique, idiosyncratic sort of gasp we try to make and plant onto the world. But it's not just that. It's once it's made in the mind, it is also a reflection of what we want to be, what we aspire to be. It is both the present moment, also what has been, and what will yet to be. Some of the best art turns out to be prophetic in its vision and in its scope, Ideas we had never sometimes work out quite the way we planned, but we commit to them, these themes, long enough, and it's funny how they actualize themselves, Sometimes art imitates life, but life always imitates art.